Most people think Jesus talked about hell the way modern preachers do. Fire and brimstone, demons with pitchforks, eternal torture chambers underground where sinners burn forever. That picture is so embedded in our culture that most Christians assume it came straight from Jesus' mouth. It didn't. When you actually go back to the original text, the Greek words Jesus used, the historical context of first-century Jerusalem, and who he was actually talking to when he brought up the subject, the picture that emerges is radically different from the one you were taught in Sunday school. Not softer, not easier. In some ways, far more disturbing, but different. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The people Jesus warned about hell most often weren't the sinners, the criminals, or the outcasts. They were the religious leaders, but the pastors, the theologians, the people who thought they had God figured out. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, you're not paying attention. Let's start with the words themselves, because the English word hell is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's hiding something important. In the entire New Testament, there are 3 different Greek words that English Bibles translate as hell. 3, and they don't all mean the same thing. The first is Hades. This is the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word Sheol. In the ancient world, Hades simply meant the realm of the dead, the place where everyone went after death, good or ye bad. It wasn't a place of punishment. It was just where the dead were. When Jesus uses this word, he's not talking about fire and torture. He's talking about death itself. The second is Tartarus. This word appears exactly once in the entire Bible, in 2 Peter 2:4, and it refers to a place where fallen angels are held in chains of darkness. Peter borrowed the word from Greek mythology. It's not used by Jesus at all. The third word, and this is the one that matters, is Gehenna. This is the word Jesus actually uses when he talks about what we call hell. He uses it 11 times in the Gospels. James uses it once. That's it. 12 total uses in the entire New Testament. And when you understand what Gehenna actually is, everything changes. Gehenna is not a mythological concept. It's not a spiritual dimension. It's not a metaphor someone invented. Gehenna is a real place. You can visit it today. It's a valley on the south side of Jerusalem called the Valley of Hinnom. In Hebrew, Gehenna. It's right there on Google Maps. But the history of that valley is what makes the word so loaded. In the Old Testament, the Valley of Hinnom was the site of some of the most horrific events recorded in Scripture. Kings Ahaz and Manasseh, 2 of Israel's worst rulers, used that valley as a site for child sacrifice. They burned their own children alive as offerings to a pagan god called Molech. 2 Chronicles 28:3 and 33. 6 record this in gut-wrenching detail. Later, the righteous King Josiah deliberately desecrated the valley to stop the practice. He turned it into a place so defiled that no one would ever use it for worship again. 2 Kings 23:10 records this. The prophet Jeremiah then prophesied that because of what had been done there, God would turn the Valley of Hinnom into a place of judgment and death. The days are coming, Jeremiah wrote. When people will no longer call it the Valley of Ben Hinnom, but the Valley of Slaughter. That's Jeremiah 7:32. By the time of Jesus, roughly 600 years after Jeremiah, the Valley of Hinnom had become infamous. It was associated with fire, death, judgment, and divine wrath. According to later rabbinic traditions, fires burned there regularly to consume refuse and waste. It was, in every sense, a place of destruction, not underground, not invisible, but literally right outside the walls of the holy city. When Jesus said Gehenna, his audience didn't picture some abstract afterlife realm. They pictured a specific valley, a valley with a history, a valley that stank of smoke and decay, a valley that was forever linked to the worst sins Israel had ever committed, the murder of their own children. That's the image Jesus chose. It and who he aimed it at matters even more than the image itself. Here's the part that makes most religious people squirm. Go through every single time Jesus mentions Gehenna in the Gospels. Read who he's talking to. Not who you assume he's talking to. Who the text actually says he's addressing. Matthew 5:22. Jesus is teaching the crowds and his disciples. He says that anyone who says, "You fool," to his brother will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna. He's not talking about atheists. He's talking about people in the community of faith, how they treat each other. The context is anger, contempt, and the way religious people dehumanize one another. Matthew 5:29-30. Same sermon. Jesus says if your right eye or right hand causes you to sin, it's better to lose them than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna. The context? Oh, he's just been talking about lust and adultery, not to prostitutes, but to the religious men in the crowd who consider themselves righteous while harboring hypocrisy in their hearts. Matthew 10:28. Jesus tells his disciples not to fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. He's preparing his followers for persecution. He's telling them not to fear human power, even lethal human power, because there's something worse. And the something worse isn't being imposed by some angry deity looking for an excuse to punish. It's the natural end of a life lived entirely cut off from God. Matthew 18:9. Same idea as chapter 5. Better to lose a body part than end up in Gehenna. The context here is about causing little ones, vulnerable believers, to stumble. That Jesus is warning leaders and teachers about the consequences of spiritual abuse, not warning sinners about their sins, warning shepherds about what happens when they destroy their sheep. Matthew 23:15. Now it gets sharp. Jesus turns to the Pharisees, the most devoutly religious people in Israel, and says, "You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of Gehenna as you are." Twice as much a child of Gehenna. He's saying the Pharisees aren't just headed for destruction, they're dragging their converts there too. The most scathing use of the word Gehenna in the entire New Testament is aimed directly at the religious establishment, not at pagans, not at prostitutes, not at tax collectors, at the people who built their identity on being close to God. Matthew 23:33. Same audience. Jesus calls the Pharisees a brood of vipers and asks them, "How will you escape being sentenced to Gehenna?" This is the question that should keep every religious leader awake at night. Jesus isn't asking it rhetorically. He's asking it as a genuine indictment. You, the ones who memorize scripture, who tithe, who pray publicly, who enforce the rules, how will you escape? Because you think your religious performance is saving you, and it's the very thing that's destroying you. Now let's talk about the one passage everyone uses to paint the traditional picture of hell, and why it's more complicated than you think. Luke 16:19-31. The rich man and Lazarus. A wealthy man lives in luxury, while a poor beggar named Lazarus suffers outside his gate. Both die. Lazarus ends up in Abraham's bosom, a place of comfort. But the rich man ends up in Hades, in torment, in flames. He begs Abraham for relief. Abraham says there's a great chasm fixed between them, No one can cross from one side to the other. This is the passage that fuels more sermons about hell than any other text in the Bible. And there are a few things about it that almost never get mentioned from the pulpit. First, the word used here is Hades, not Gehenna. Jesus is not describing the final destination of the wicked. He's describing a parable set in the intermediate state between death and resurrection. The distinction matters because Jesus himself makes a distinction between Hades and Gehenna elsewhere in the text. They're not the same thing. Second, this is a parable. Jesus is telling a story. He's using the framework of a well-known Jewish folktale about the reversal of fortunes after death, a story form that his audience would have recognized immediately. The point of the parable isn't a geography lesson about the afterlife. The point is in the punchline, which almost nobody quotes. The rich man begs Abraham to send Lazarus back from the dead to warn his brothers. And Abraham says, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead." That last line is not about hell. It's about the hardness of the human heart. It's about people who have access to the truth and refuse to respond to it. And, if you read it in context, it's a devastating prediction of what will happen when Jesus himself rises from the dead and the religious establishment still refuses to believe. The third, the rich man's sin isn't named as murder, idolatry, or sexual immorality. His sin is ignoring the suffering of the man at his gate. Every single day, he walked past Lazarus. Every single day, he had the power to help, and didn't. His damnation isn't about what he did. It's about what he refused to do. And that lands harder than any fire and brimstone sermon ever could. Now, here's where this gets personal. Because there's a pattern in who Jesus warns about Gehenna, and it should unsettle anyone who considers themselves a serious person of faith. Jesus never, not once, warns a prostitute about hell. He never warns a tax collector about hell. He never warns a pagan, a Roman soldier, or a Samaritan about hell. The people that religious culture labeled as sinners are consistently the people Jesus treats with the most compassion, the most patience, and the most hope. The people he warns about Gehenna are the religious, the devout, the theologically educated, the people who use God's name to build power, control others, and protect their own status. The people who have turned faith into a system of performance and exclusion. The people who shut the door of the kingdom in other people's faces and won't go through it themselves. That's not a comfortable finding, especially if you're someone who spends a lot of time thinking about who's in and who's out. Because Jesus' warnings about Gehenna weren't threats designed to scare sinners into submission. They were alarms going off inside the religious establishment. They were Jesus saying, "You think you're safe because you know the rules." But knowing the rules while missing the heart of God is the most dangerous place a human being can stand. There's another dimension to this that rarely gets explored. Jesus talked about judgment constantly, but the judgment he described looks almost nothing like the popular image of hell. Let's look at what he actually emphasized. In Matthew 25, Jesus describes the final judgment. And the dividing line between the righteous and the condemned isn't doctrine. It isn't church attendance. It isn't moral purity. It's this: I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. The condemned are stunned. They say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" And Jesus answers, "Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." The criterion for judgment isn't belief. It's love made visible. It's what you did, or refused to do, for the most vulnerable people around you. And the terrifying implication is that both groups, the saved and the condemned, call him Lord. Both groups believed. The difference was in what their belief produced. That should rewrite how you think about everything. Because the popular version of hell says, believe the right things or burn forever. But Jesus' version of judgment says, it doesn't matter what you say you believe if the people around you are starving and you don't lift a finger. Now, and I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, but doesn't the Bible still teach that there's a real, final consequence for rejecting God? Are you saying hell isn't real? That's a fair question. And the answer isn't what you expect from either side of the debate. No serious reading of the New Testament can dismiss the reality of divine judgment. Jesus clearly taught that there are consequences, real, weighty, permanent consequences for how human beings live. He used the most visceral imagery available to him: fire, darkness, weeping, destruction, to convey the seriousness of those consequences. He was not being casual. He was not being metaphorical in the sense of, it doesn't matter. He was deadly serious. But here's the part that gets lost. The purpose of those warnings was never to terrorize people into compliance, and it was to wake them up. Every warning Jesus gave about Gehenna was an invitation in disguise. Don't go there. Turn around. There's a different path. I'm standing on it. Come. When Jesus told the Pharisees they were headed for Gehenna, he wasn't gleefully announcing their destruction. He was begging them to change course. When he told his disciples to fear the one who could destroy both soul and body, he was trying to reorient their fear, away from human power and toward the only thing that actually matters: their relationship with God. The fire Jesus talked about wasn't a torture device designed by a sadistic deity. It was a description of what happens when a human being permanently and irreversibly cuts themselves off from the source of everything good, from life, from love, from light, from God himself. And maybe that's the most terrifying version of all. Not a God who sends people to hell as punishment, but a God who lets people choose it and grieves when they do. Let me bring this home, because none of this matters if it stays as ancient history. The version of hell that most of us were taught was designed to control behavior through fear. Believe this or burn, obey this or suffer forever. And for millions of people, that version of hell didn't bring them closer to God. It made them terrified of God. It turned faith into a hostage negotiation instead of a love story. But when you go back to what Jesus actually said, when you strip away the medieval imagery, the Dante's Inferno overlay, the fire and brimstone sermons that have more to do with the 14th century than the first, what you find isn't less serious. It's more. Just because Jesus wasn't warning people about a place. He was warning them about a trajectory, a way of living, a direction of the soul. He was saying, if you build your life on power instead of love, on performance instead of authenticity, on religion instead of relationship, you are already walking toward destruction. Not because God is pushing you there, because you are choosing it. One step at a time, one compromise at a time, one person ignored, one neighbor unloved, one act of mercy refused, at a time. Gehenna wasn't underground. It was right outside the city walls. And maybe that's the point. The destruction Jesus warned about isn't hidden in some distant afterlife. It's visible, right now, in the way we treat each other, or refuse to. That the word Gehenna was the name of a valley where children were sacrificed by people who thought they were worshiping God. And Jesus picked that word, that specific, horrifying word, to describe what happens when religion loses its soul. Not to scare you, to save you. The question was never, do you believe in hell? The question Jesus was actually asking, the question he aimed at the most religious people in the room, was far more dangerous than that. Do you believe in love? Because everything he said about judgment comes down to that. Not what you believed about God, what you did with the people God put in front of you. And that is either the most liberating thing you've ever heard, or the most terrifying, depending on how you've been living. If this changed how you read the Gospels, then the story of what Jesus actually said about money is even more uncomfortable, and nobody preaches it. I break the whole thing down in my next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.